All right, so first of all, I want to just introduce this whole process of making a Christmas card by showing you some examples of cards that have inspired me. And I recommend you looking at different kinds of cards that are out there to figure out what kind of a format you want to choose for your card. So there's the standard card, which is just of an image on one side. It's open. Sometimes it has a message, but it doesn't have to. These are cards that I've collected that I thought were really great. And not that I would ever copy them, but I might take an idea from them and use it for my, when I'm making my card. So I just showed you a simple one. Here is the same thing, except it's printed really on the back, empty. It's just printed on both sides, or one side, but like, and it actually goes like this. So it's quite humorous, and it's quite nice because and you write on the inside because it's completely one big image folded in half. The other thing you can do is do an image. This is all on one side that folds so that it fits in an envelope, so it has two views, closed and open. This I bought. This is from New York, I think. I found it in a store and thought, well, it's a great idea. I might use it someday. Here's another version of the similar thing, except this has no image on it. It's just cut. But you could put an image on one side, just one part, 1/3, and let the rest be cut. Or you could do what I'm going to show you, where I printed on this side and on the back. Here's another one I found that I thought was both sides printed. It's quite long, but it folds in thirds, so it's very nice closed, and then it's printed only on 2/3 of the back, not the very back. And then if you want to get really three-dimensional, the nice thing about these is they stand. You can go for something like this, which is, two pieces printed. You'd have to make 2 plates for each. And then they just, when you cut them out, you can slide them together and they stand. And in this case, the card came with a separate card for writing on. Okay, so for the demonstrations, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about various things. Choosing your structure, the size. What size am I going to use? Well, the main thing is that you know what your envelope size is. So in my case, I have these envelopes, which are standard sizes. This one you can buy in Staples or in Michael's very easily. These I had to order online from Staples. So 8 and 3/4 by 5 3/4 inches and 10 by 7. Now the reason these are so big is partly because of the plates I had, also my idea. Anyway, it also was complicated by the fact that I included a calendar. So you don't have to work this big. I liked working this big. It was really interesting and challenging, and of course, impressive. So you need to know what your envelope size is and make sure that your design is going to fit in it with a little extra space. You don't want it exact. You want it maybe a 1/4 inch at least less in both directions than the envelope size. Okay, so to begin with, I'm just going to show you my process, mention it briefly, and then in detail show you each type of format that I chose. So the first one is an ordinary card. I drew a picture of a hare, very quick sketch in the size I needed, and then I refined it a bit. I wanted added details, tried to figure out the angles of the legs, you can see. And then I finally came up with a final design, which I put on tracing paper so that I could transfer it to my block. I transferred it to my block, I cut my block, I came up with a registration system, and I printed it. So here's another one which I'm going to demonstrate printing. I found a drawing in my sketchbook. I made it the right size for fitting on my block. I transferred the design onto my block. I cut the block, I printed it, and there's my final print. I hand painted the lights. So that's the basic sort of structure. You all know how to print, but I'm going to show you how to do the registration, which is just meant to keep your prints the same over and over and over again. So we're going to go over to my press, which is at the other end of the room. And I will show you my process for this. So you can see I've taped onto my block my registration. So I've marked where the paper goes, where the block goes. I marked the top of the block. Now, normally I would put it on this side, but I have it on this side for a reason, just to show you that as long as you have it set up the correct way, it works. So I'm going to put my inked block there. I'm going to put my paper on. Now you'll notice I have no blankets because these blocks, which are 3/4 of an inch high, it's actually easier to control it if you don't have any blankets, and my press will do it. So now I'm going to set up my paper so that it will print. Put my hand down, and now I'm going to crank it through. Oh, it feels like it's not tight enough. Hang on. There we go. And there you can see, if I fold it in half, and I will check that, make sure it is in the right place before I fold it. If I need to trim this edge, I will. But there's my, now let it dry, and then I go in with a watercolor and I paint the little lights. Okay, so this is a card that I made. It's a little more complicated than your standard card because I cut out part of it and I glued the hat on. So what I did initially was I had a drawing. I made some sketches. Actually, you can see I made 2 here. I then blew them up. I just did them in the computer, blew them up to something bigger. So here's my 2 different ideas. And then I came up with a final drawing, which was this. And I decided I would have the hat sort of being knocked off. So I printed the hat separately and the body separately. So I just want to take you through how that works. But I'm going to show you another one because I made 2 cards that year. Here's the other card. Same idea, but you can see that I had the head separate because of the way it was going to stick out past where I wanted it to, and I sort of wanted to have this idea of it. I could even tilt it, change the angle. It had some options that I really liked, but basically I still cut out a part and I glued the head on, but I printed the head separate. But to get there, I started out with several different drawings. I did this drawing, which I rejected. You can see I kind of got I had the background idea of the card. Then I did this drawing, which I actually made. I actually cut the plate for this one. And there's the head for that one. And here's the print. And I decided I just hated it. So I rejected all of that and I started again. And I made another drawing, which I finally decided I liked, but I wanted the head separate. So I did a couple of versions of the head, rejected head, and I wound up with this one. So here's the body, and here's the head, and the head was glued on afterwards, so I could move it, I could have it different angles. All right, so that was the preparation for these cards. And now I'm going to show you the registration. So it was important to decide on the size of paper. I always print bigger with bigger paper and trim it because in case something happens, I don't want to lose my image and I don't want to waste time. So I basically get a piece of newsprint. I mark out how big the paper is going to be. I trace around my block so I can put it in the same place every time. There's my hair on this side. Now, because I wanted the head and the hat separate, I had to print on a separate piece of paper the hair head and the hat. Okay, so I inked those, I printed those, and now I'm going to show you how I cut them. So here I have my print. Now you can see I've marked with pencil on this, but normally I wouldn't do that on the actual print itself. I would get that all figured out, and then I would start cutting. Okay, so I'm going to cut where I've marked. And I've carefully measured so I know where the fold is. And I need to actually determine the fold. Probably, I could mark it actually at the beginning. I'm going to use a bone folder for that. Now you can see I stop when I get to the image because I'm going to cut from there. I don't want to put the fold through the head. I want the head to be flat. And then I take maybe a knife like this, and I'm going to just cut around the head. And I don't want to, I just want one continuous line because I don't want it to look messy on the back when I get finished. I wouldn't have drawn this line here. I just did that to sort of show you. Okay, so let's see if that worked. Yes. Okay, so there's my cut, and there's my fold. Oh, well, I've already done the, yeah. So there's my card. Now I need to cut the hat out. And in this case, I cut a little bit around it, give it a little space to show it off. I didn't cut right next to the hat. Give it a little white space around just to helps it pop it out. You don't want it to disappear. In this case, I actually cut the little movement marks. And then I just take a little extra piece of card that I've cut out, and I'm going to figure out what angle to put it at so that it is amusing. And then I'm going to glue that on. Voila, there's my card. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to print on two sides of the paper to get an image on the front of your card and on the inside of your card. In this case, my envelope size is 7 inches by 10 inches. I've made 2 plates that are exactly the same size, and I've made a registration template, a jig. I'm going to print this one on this is the front of the card, and then I'm going to flip the paper over, put in the other plate, and print the other side of the card. I don't have a dry card to show you, so we'll just see if this works. Okay, here we go. Okay, so here's the image. Now I'm going to print this way, except I'm going to change plates. So I have my old plate. Here's my new plate. I'm going to put it in the same place. And I'm going to start my paper in the same place. Put it down. Now I have newsprint here because it's going to pick up some of the ink from my other side. Hopefully not too much. We'll see. And okay, so you can see that if I fold this like this, I get an image on the front and an image inside. And then I would trim the top and I'd trim the edges so that it was the perfect size. So the important thing about this is the way you set up the registration. So I made sure that this distance here is the same on both sides. So that's my fold line right here. It's the middle. So when I trim this, I have to trim it after I've folded it, which of course I can see. I can use my ruler and my bone folder to make sure that fold is in the right place. And then I can trim the card afterwards. I can trim the top off and the side off. Okay, now I'm going to show you another way of printing on both sides. Okay, so this is the same card, but I've got a split front. I've printed it on the sides of one side and the middle of the other side. So this is a bit tricky to figure out, and you have to have your registration and your jig set up properly. So I have to admit, when I made this, it took me a few times to figure it out so that when I folded it, it would match up and look like one image. Okay, so here's my jig. I've got the size of my paper, 15 inches by 10 inches. And I've got my plates. As you can see, I had them, I cut the whole thing together first as one plate, and then I cut it, and I cut it in a kind of logical fashion. Instead of just straight in half, I wanted it to follow the line of the house. So it would have this, it would just make it look more like a house and not like a drawing cut in half. Now you can see that the size of the plate, the front plate, and the size of the interior plate, they're not the same. So this makes it difficult to plan. So what I did was I made a drawing and I traced these, I did some measuring, and I traced where I would print the one side on my paper. So here's my paper. I've got the front, let's see, the back of the front. So anyway, so I'm going to print this like this, like that. Now the house is here and here. Now when I take those off, I have a space that's like this, but because these are not the same width, this one is 3.5, this one is actually 4.25. I had to shift where I put the center plate when I print on the back. I had to move it over, and I marked it on my jig. So I still have the same jig. I'm still going to line up the paper the same way, but it's on the other side. And I had to make sure this was in the right place so that the fold, which would be here, when it's folded, the card will be 6 inches. This is 5 3/4 wide. So I have a little wiggle room here. You can see that. So I measured over. This is 4.25. This is 3.5. So I need to make sure I have 4.25 on this side, because it needs to accommodate this image, because this image is actually over here on the other side, right? This one's narrower, so I didn't have to worry about it too much, but it really had to accommodate this one. Okay, so then I print it on the other side, let it dry. Then I do my bone folder where it goes, fold it, cut it. And I think I probably cut it with scissors. Looks like it. So that it would fold. Now you can see with this card, I didn't quite get this in the right place. I printed this on a letterpress and I had to glue it down. So I got it inside okay, the right shape here, but I could have pushed it up a bit. I didn't give myself much room at the bottom, and you can see I had to leave it. I couldn't trim it at all. I had to really leave that there to accommodate the middle image. Okay, so I recommend doing a mock-up, doing a pre-print trial before you start printing both sides. print one side, make sure you've got your jig set up correctly before you keep going. And have fun. Now, if you want to make it simple, you can just make a plate, make them exactly the same size, cut it down the middle, move it to the sides. You can do that too. I made it complicated partly because that's just me not really planning it out completely before I start. I recommend doing that. Okay, good luck. Okay, so I had this idea of doing a card that would be folded in such a way that you would see an image on the back and on the front. And I started out, this was one idea I had, knowing that each side, like the plate on the front, had to be the same as the back but reversed. The shape had to be the same. So I made this drawing. It's actually not bad. I might do it in the future. So it was only 5 plates. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2 the same, 1 not, without a double. And I rejected that idea for some reason. I tried another idea. I went for four different layers. You can see this is much less realized. I somehow just didn't, maybe I just didn't like it, so I abandoned it. And I finally came up with this plan, which again, you can see I'm still struggling trying to figure out shapes and how to make this work. And in the end, this is what I wound up with. So I printed light blue on the back. You can see I left a blank for a place to write on. And I did dark blue on the other side. So for each of these shapes, except for the last one, there are 2 plates. And they're in reverse. They're flipped in terms of their shape. But the imagery is different. So I had this idea. It would be, we're on the outside of these houses, and we're going to go inside and see what's there. Or maybe it's just one house. I think it's one house, a single person with a dog, and then the image, the last image of the season with, of course, my favorite animal, the hare. All right, so having thought of the idea, I then had to figure out how to make it. So I broke down, this is at the beginning, sort of figuring out things. I broke down my shapes, and I think I wound up with just these ones. And I then, of course, traced it onto tracing paper, and then you can see I had to figure that out. These are the same, these are the same, and this is the same. Now, the nice thing about this is because the top was cut, if I had slight anomalies that they didn't line up perfectly, I was still okay, because I could trim it in such a way that you didn't know that. I might lose a little bit of my plate, but you wouldn't realize that they weren't perfect. So here's my plates that I wound up with. Okay, so I marked it because I'm going to flip it the same way I did with the last one I showed you. So we have the small house. And if I put this like this, you can see how it's going to line up, of course, but I'm going to put it, I'm going to line it up straight on the bottom. Then we have this house, and we have this house. And this is blank because this is the one side. So I get my template, everything lined up. I make sure that the edge, let's say if I put this here, I'll just put it upside down so you can see. This edge to the edge of the paper, the edge of the plate to the edge of the paper, the edge of the plate to the edge of the paper is equidistant, because when I put my paper down, I'm going to put it down this way the first time, print on it, and then now there's an image on this side, and I'm going to turn it over and print the other way, and guess what? This was here, now it needs to be over here. All right, so I'm going to print that way. So in fact, this is what I wind up with. Now, if I were really not wanting to do this, where it was, okay, this is just too scary for me, what I would do is that I would make all of these plates exactly the same size and exactly the same shape. And then I would either cut it later. So I would have the lino go all the way up here, all the way. But when I trace it, I would trace this line flipped on the other one. You still have to make, in this case, 7 plates to make this folded thing. Okay? So that when you're printing, because you're going to put this down, this is the bottom, you're going to put that down, print that, let it dry, and then you're going to print this way. And you can tell if this round piece is here, this has to be there too. You're flipping it. You're flipping it. So you have to really get that. Okay? Okay. What I did was, to help myself, is I made a little template to make sure that the plate is small. The plate is house with the door open. The plate is the house with the shed, no plate. So I marked it down so I would remember where to put it. And then on this side, the plate is the tree, the plate is the dog on the porch, the plate is the fireplace, the teapot, okay? So that I could not be confused when it came to printing the second time.